their website, Snowball website, and all along. This is the organization.
All right, so while they're collecting the cards, I'm going to start with a question for Lyle, maybe for Barbara. When you were talking about the films that go on the screen, and you talked about they put them on the inside and that helps with the wind, and you talked about using like a glass tinting company. So are those screens tinted? Is it going to change the color of the glass?
Yeah, well, it all depends. You can actually get them. Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yep. Just hold it close to your mouth.
Yeah, you can actually get a lot of different types of films. So you can get a completely clear one, which will not tint the glass at all, if that's what you want. If it's on, maybe the north side of the house, you go through a lot of stuff. Or you can get the ones that have different sort of coloured tints, and it really that the colour of the tint really depends on aesthetics, which Barbara can maybe speak more to, and how much energy performance you want to get out of that tint. The colour is not going to affect your hurricane rating whatsoever. You put a completely clear one in for your hurricane purposes, but the colour of the tint will help with your energy.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add, avoid mirrored films. We usually go for like a neutral gray when we do films on historic film if they want the solar protection, but really avoid anything that's highly mirrored. It's going to just look off on your historic film.
I can add something. Not only are there various gradations of color you can get, but there's also various gradations of strength. We're putting in a lot in the military, bomb-proof your window. I mean, they're virtually, when they blow, the whole window will blow with it. It won't break.
Question about anything you can do for louvered windows, for the jalousie windows. We've only talked about fixed and more standard windows.
I wish I had a good answer for that, but there are some new jalousie windows that are better. They kind of lock the panes in place. And so if you use those in conjunction with actual pieces of glazing that are laminated, then you would get good protection. So that might be an option for a new house. It's going to be difficult to maintain your historic sort of jalousie windows. And I don't know how historic jalousie windows really are.
They actually are becoming historic now.
But it's going to be hard to maintain those and really provide much protection. You're probably better to go with either plywood sheeting or one of the other sheeting systems that Barbara mentioned, or one of the screen type systems in that case.
I was just going to say, I think you're probably better augmenting the protection from the outside, adding that in the screens.
Barbara, you had mentioned the map of the flood zones, and where can people find those?
There's a link in the references, but I know that if you go to the, there's a couple of access points. You can actually go to FEMA website, just type in Google FEMA, and it'll take you to the firm maps and flood insurance rate map link. You can go to the City and County of Honolulu's website, and then zero in on with your tax map on your parcel, and it will tell you what flood zone you're in and provide you a link to the flood map. So in the references that Kirsten's going to put up online,
Yep, we'll put it on our
there'll be a link to the FEMA site.
And the references that we passed out, it's on there as well.
Question for Sue. You had talked about some of the credits for the homeowners insurance policies. Are there any similar credits for apartment or condo owners rather than single family residential?
If you're talking about a concrete high-rise, no, because you're not going to hurricane clip. You're talking about a wood frame townhouse, yes, the master policy gets a discount if they hurricane clip. That is a question every time somebody says, hey Sue, we're going to re-roof our condo, our townhouse, I say, are you folks clipping? Okay, and I say, give me the contract that shows that, because then I can get a discount on the master property premium, which affects all the owners in the condo because you're not paying as much for your insurance premium. So that way, yes. who live in the condo, but not for you as an individual unit owner.
For Lyle, when you have a carport, so it just has the roof and some structure but no walls, how does that affect the winds and the load and your diagram of the effects on the walls and the roof?
Can you switch the microphones?
Actually, this one's,
Yeah, so if you have an open structure that the wind can actually flow through, then that actually will reduce the load on the roof. But the problem is if you have one wall, which you typically will on a carport, you'll have it up against the side of the house or something, then that can be a problem because the wind can go in but it can't go out. So that will actually typically increase the load. So yeah, it sort of gets very, I guess, complicated, but the key is if you either want the wind going all the way through or you want it really completely enclosed. You don't want that in-between stage. That's the worst.
Several of you mentioned the importance of trimming trees or having the hazards set back. And this question is, what if it's not your tree? What if it's the city's tree or your neighbor's tree? Who's responsible for the tree if it's going to impact your property? I don't know if does anyone have any idea if it's not your tree? Sue?
I'll just say from an insurance standpoint, we have many a homeowner suing another homeowner because they trimmed a tree that they had no right to trim. And how dare you trim my tree, and I'm going to sue you. We have a lot of lawsuits on that. We had a homeowner who just trimmed his side of a tree, and it looked beautiful from the other person's side. But if you saw it from the front, literally he cut the damn thing right in half. And he just had a half a tree that was, so you get along with your neighbors. Say, hey neighbor, if you don't want, don't do it. Okay, please.
and I guess if it's a city's tree, I'd call the mayor's office.
Yeah. Tell him to come out.
Call your elected representatives, ask them to trim the tree. So this is a question about tying a roof down with straps or ropes, so an external kind of net over the roof. Is that a myth, a waste of time, better than nothing?
I can, Tim, you want to talk about your what you saw?
Yeah,
Tim, come on up.
Tim, yep, come on.
I've seen a lot.
This is Tim, our pop-up panelist.
Thanks, and thanks for inviting me. I do, not only I cover Hawaii Islands, but also the islands in the Pacific, and I've had the good fortune of traveling to places like American Samoa, where they do a lot of fishing, you know, and they have the cannery there and everything. And I've seen homes there where they just put the fish net over the homes. And they've had so many typhoons down in that region that they just leave the fish net over the homes. So they were still there, you know, so like maybe they work, you know, but it's not, I don't think, you might get, if you're an association, somebody might complain or something like that. So it's probably better to use a system that's been tested and proven.
So Barbara, you had mentioned the corrugated plastic material to help with the wind abatement. Has that been approved by Department of Planning and Permitting? Are there any permitting issues, any special permissions?
I'm not aware that there are building permits required for the temporary protection. Does anybody have any experience with that?
A week's notice. Well, in certain A-zone areas, they require like plywood protection, safer or more impact blocks on the drawing.
For new construction.
And renovation.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So if you're building a new house to the current code, you can design it two ways. One way is you can design without hurricane glazing, but you can design for higher roof uplift pressure. So the assumption is you don't want to spend the money on the hurricane glazing, but you're going to design the structure to be stronger, and so your glass will probably be broken and you'll have a lot of water damage and that sort of thing, but the structure should still be intact after the hurricane. The other way you can do it is design it with hurricane glazing, and you can design them for lower wind pressure, so your structural cost is not quite as high, but you're paying more for your glazing. Now, another way to do that is to design for that same lower wind pressure, but design on the basis that you're going to protect your windows with pre-cut and basically sheets that are stored somewhere that are basically ready to deploy. And in order to really meet that requirement, you need to demonstrate that your sheets are ready to deploy, easy enough to deploy, and that sort of thing. And that's probably a very grey one. I don't know how the building department exactly kind of monitors that, but it is actually an option in the building code. Now, for an old historic building, that really doesn't apply because you're not applying, you're not trying to get a building permit. It would apply if you're doing a renovation and you're maybe doing a major addition, then the building permit would apply. But if you're just doing a voluntary strengthening or some form of protection, then you don't need to get a permit to deploy screens. And it is encouraged. And I think the main consideration would be just don't do something that's going to adversely affect the aesthetics of your historic home.
Yeah, the binder that was going around that was prepared by the SOAST at the university, they actually tested the corrugated plastic and they found it stronger than plywood.
Yeah, actually, we wrote this off.
Yeah, okay, so yes.
So, yeah, those panels are now available in Hawaii. There's a company, Hardware Hawaii, bringing them in. They're polycarbonate, and they passed all the missile tests. They're stronger than plywood, and they're lighter. So, is it?
They let light come in.
Oh yeah, they let light.
It's not like you're-
But they're still, it's a temporary installation, not permanent.
If you have the name of that distributor, we'll give it to Andrea and we'll add it to the resources on our website.
Sure.
Thank you. This is a question for Sue. Oh, I'm sorry, Alan, did you want to?
No, it was on the list.
It was on the list, okay. So, Sue, if you have a home where the floor elevation or the base elevation is below FEMA's base elevation, how does that affect your insurance premium cost?
Flood premium will be more expensive than if it was above, but it is what it is. Many of us cannot raise our homes up. Okay, so accept the fact and deal with it. That's simple, because unless FEMA changes the rules, you're stuck. Okay, and you're not going to find a private insurance company willing to insure a home that is in a dangerous flood area that is below flood. But if you were, they'll buy you excess, but they're not going to start with the first $250,000 that FEMA pays you. It is what it is.
I was just saying, could add a little bit to that, and that there are still things you could do to your house if you're below, what is a common flood elevation, and that is sort of reduce your risk by using materials that are less susceptible to flooding. Remove the drywall and use plywood, things like that. Move critical mechanical equipment, that sort of thing, above into the second floor or into the attic. So there are still things you can do if your floor is below the flood elevation to kind of reduce your risk during a flood.
This question is just off the top. Do you know the name of the window abatement company? I'm not sure quite what that question is.
For the screen,
Yes.
yeah, I have it. I bookmarked it, and I'll give it to Andrea, and she can put it in the resources. So.
Okay, if you have a double wall, how do you secure that to a lava rock or cement base? So it's not to wood, it's to masonry.
So you need to make sure that the lava rock wall below is strong enough, and if it is just a lava rock wall, a good way to probably, if you have access in behind it, is actually to pour like a concrete stem wall behind it, and then actually anchor your house to that concrete stem wall rather than relying on just stacked lava rock, which stacked lava rock is actually quite weak itself. It's not really bound together. There's no steel components to it. The strength of a wall really comes from the reinforcing inside that wall. If you don't have any steel reinforcing inside the wall really doesn't have a lot of strength. I had a lava rock wall collapse on my property, and during a large flood, large sort of rain event that just pushed a lot of water in behind the wall. They do tend to be quite vulnerable. So the best thing you can do is to try to get some sort of concrete wall or reinforced masonry, concrete masonry wall in behind that, and then anchor down to that. There's not much you can do to anchor just to a lava rock wall.
Okay. I'm trying to read this question, so I hope I don't garble it, but does it make sense to install the HPT roof to wall, but not complete the load path on the post to slab? So you're doing some of it, but not all of it. Is something better than nothing, or do you not bother at all?
Yeah, I would say something is better than nothing. If you connect your roof down to your wall, you've probably greatly increased the chance that the building will survive, because now you've got the weight of all the walls basically holding that building down. So it's probably doubled the weight that's holding it down. So you're not completely protected, but you have definitely increased the strength of the house. So even if you can only connect the rafters down to the wood top plate, that's still going to provide, because maybe you have access up in the attic to connect the rafters to the top plate, but you don't really have access to the studs below the top plate. That rafter to top plate will still help, because then you've got sheathing and you've got other components that will help to connect the top plate down to the studs. And so as you work your way down, you kind of add more material and you kind of add more strength. So ideally you do the complete system, but starting from the top and working your way down is definitely helpful.
What happens with solar panels?
Solar panels, if they're flat to the roof, then they don't have too much impact. If they're set up on a frame that offsets them from the plane of the roof, then they sort of act a bit like sails, and they can definitely increase the loads. So, so what the city typically allows is they allow you typically to install a solar panel on flat to a roof without strengthening the roof. But as soon as you tilt it and you put it on a frame to get a better angle to the sun, then they expect you to strengthen your roof in order to install it. Yeah, if it's parallel to the roof, even if there's a few inches, it's probably not going to have too much of an impact. It's more if it's on an angle. I can't say they won't go sailing. It then comes down to how well they're anchored and how good the substrate is that they're anchored into. But they shouldn't have if they're flat to the roof, they shouldn't have an overall impact on the roof, on the forces on the roof itself. So the panel might come flying off, but the roof will still see the same forces that it would have seen before.
So what category 4 or 5 will we start seeing a lot of photovoltaic panels flying in our neighborhood? Because I swear 95% of the installs are on frames, they're not flat to the roof.
Yeah, I wouldn't even go as far as 4 or 5. I would start to look at category 2 type hurricanes as potential. That's when you're probably going to start having, especially if it's a new building, then it should withstand a category 3. It should probably suffer fairly minor damage for a 4, but if it's an older building, then category 1 and 2 hurricanes are going to cause damage.
Going back to is it okay to go back to the stone wall? Yeah, who was the gentleman that asked the question, or the person that asked about the stone wall? Double wall on top of the stone wall? That's a few questions on how high the stone wall was. Anybody here that asked the question?
Mine, it's a large crawl space, so 3-4 feet.
Oh, it's just 3-4 feet of crawl space that you're covering. What we did on another house is that we did piers, and then we broke apart the stone wall, came up with a pipe to fasten, and the pipe to fasten to the beam above, or the floor above, and then secure it to the foundation. And then we built the wall back again around it, so you couldn't tell. That's one way. We did another one where it's 12 feet tall, and we put like you said, we did a steel post on the inside with another beam, and secured the beam to the rafters. So it was like a double beam, like 2 walls, but it was only a pipe.
I have a question I might need some interpretation on, but it says, were the structural upgrades that were suggested tonight for Hurricane Safer-Simpson?
That's hurricane level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think
Oh.
we're talking mostly about 3, right?
Yeah. Okay, so what level of hurricane will these structural improvements help?
Yeah, so they'll help for any level of hurricane or even a wind storm. I didn't really get into the specifics of what level of hurricane protection you're going to get, because it really does depend on the individual house and the individual load path. But if you design to the current building code, and if you use clips that basically get you to the equivalency of the current building code, then you should be good for about a category 3 hurricane.
So for a single wall house, you're trying to get the path load, through the system. How do you do that with tongue and groove siding? Does that make any difference?
Yeah, so the tongue and groove siding itself is actually very strong for that vertical load path. It's actually a strong material in tension. And so really what you're trying to do is make sure that everything is connected to the siding, top and bottom. And then the other thing that's important is that the siding itself is stable, so it can't tip over sideways. So if you have 4 walls, then and you have a roof that's connected to all 4 walls, then if you have a force in one direction, then the walls parallel to that force will sort of provide the overall stability. And then you want to just make sure that you've connected to the vertical siding at the top. So you connect through the trim, or whatever the horizontal trim board is, and you connect all the way through to that vertical siding. That's actually the goal, excuse me, of the fasteners, to connect it through to the vertical siding. And then at the bottom, you connect the vertical siding to the beams and to the posts. But the vertical siding itself is actually very strong for uplift.
There's different types of single wall homes. The more common that we see today is the post and pier. So it's got 4x4 posts, or at least a 2x4 post, and they're normally next to the windows or the ends of the corners of the room. And then they have a beam on the top. So if that's the case, then you really have a structure with the post and the beams. And the T&G walls is actually just a cladding, a wall covering over it, so that it protects it from the wind and the rain. But the structure itself is that beam above. So what we do is you use your hurricane ties to those beams, to the posts, from the post to the joist, from the joist to the beam below, and from the beam somehow get it secured to the ground so it doesn't lift up. The design of these homes were so that the houses hold up, but with the hurricanes and stuff, with these winds, you're trying to hold the house down. So opposite of what we were constructing the houses for in the early days. But all we have to do is now to retrofit is use those structural elements of the beam, the rafter, the beam, the posts, the floor joists, and the beam below, and tie it together so it becomes a unit. So that's the way to do it.
Can I clarify, please? So are you saying that in single wall construction, there's actually a post and beam?
Normally what we've seen and was built more in the, I guess would be the 60s and the 70s, because it was faster for us to build it that way, was the beam and the post. And it may not be a true 4x4 post in each corner, but there'd be 2x4s on the walls where the windows are to help stiffen that window. Because you had an opening in the T&G, that T&G would be flopping around, so we put a post there to help strengthen the walls. But that beam above is actually a structural element. The beam below the joist is all your structural elements. Tie them together. I mean, most of the houses that we see are that way. The houses that were built true TNG in the 70s, though, they had a lot of them that were 1-inch net. So those are the 1-inch net TNG are actually structural members in itself because they're so thick pieces of redwood.
Right. I was going to say, there's a lot of homes where there are no vertical studs. And it's the sort of like late 60s, 70s, and it's the thicker material. And then it acts the way that Lyle described it, for it's quite strong tension.
We're going to end this by asking each of our panelists if you had one piece of advice that you want them to leave with, what is that one piece of advice? We'll start with Alan and come this way.
The best advice I have is to survey a house, take a look at it. If you have a chance, hire a structural engineer or an engineer to go with you, walk around the house, take a look and see what you can do, and notate what the structural elements you need to help to strengthen up the house. I think that's the simplest, easiest way to start.
I think I would say the best advice I would give anybody is to make sure that you are assuring to value, replacement value. And I think that is the most important thing, because no matter whether you have a small loss or a large loss, if you're not insured to value, you will not have enough insurance money to rebuild.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to the top of my priority list that I mentioned, and that is, I think, to protect the windows in some way. It does double duty, because by protecting the windows, you're actually reducing your structural loads, so you don't actually need your hurricane ties as much if you protect your windows and stop the house being pressurized in the first place. And then go to the hurricane clips next, if that's also on the list.
I suppose my advice would be to protect yourself and your family and your loved ones first.
Also good advice. I just want to thank all of our panelists. Please join me in thanking them. Also thank you to Tim for adding your wisdom and joining in with our panel. And of course all of you for the care you take with Hawaii's heritage, with your part of preserving special places in Hawaii. We thank you all for coming tonight, and of course we thank the library for hosting us too. My name is Kirsten Faulkner, and I'm the Executive Director of Historic Hawaii Foundation. And thank you all for coming out to the first class of our Greening Your Heritage Home series. So I think many of you are familiar with